Lieutenant Daniel Reeves crouched behind the remains of an alien war machine, his heart pounding in his chest as smoke swirled around him. The battlefield was littered with debris, and the sky of Cryon was choked with thick, acrid clouds. This was supposed to be the final battle, humanity's last stand to end the war with the Zorith Alliance. His squad was scattered, casualties mounting with each passing second, and the explosions that shook the ground left little hope. Daniel's instincts told him the end was near. The enemy forces were retreating, leaving behind the bodies of their dead and the remnants of a war that had consumed countless lives and entire planets. Victory was within his grasp, but something tugged at his gut, telling him this wasn't over. Not yet. Moving through the rubble, Daniel caught sight of a figure slumped behind a shattered barricade. It was a Zorith soldier, his armor battered, his body broken, blood seeping from wounds that no medic could heal. Daniel raised his plasma rifle, his finger resting on the trigger, but something stopped him. There, in the soldier's chest plate, glinting in the dim light, was a royal insignia. This was no ordinary soldier. It was Prince Valek, heir to the Zorith throne and commander of the alien forces. The very leader who had orchestrated the war that had ravaged Daniel's life and countless others. Seeing him there, weak and bleeding, stirred a primal rage in Daniel. He could end the war right now with a single shot, vengeance for his fallen comrades. But as Daniel looked into Valek's eyes, he saw something he hadn't expected. No malice, no hatred, only weariness. A tiredness that matched Daniel's own. They were both soldiers, bound by duty to their people, each fighting for survival. Lowering his rifle, Daniel took a deep breath and approached the wounded prince. Kneeling beside him, his voice firm yet soft, he said, "I'm not going to kill you." Valek's golden eyes, filled with pain and surprise, met Daniel's. "Why?" The word rasped from his lips. "Because I'm tired of this war," Daniel replied. "And I think you are too." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the battlefield eerily silent around them. Then, slowly, Daniel reached down, pulling the prince to his feet, supporting his weight. Together, they limped away from the carnage. Two enemies, united by exhaustion, loss, and a shared desire for something beyond destruction. That decision, though Daniel couldn't have known it at the time, would change the course of the galaxy. He had spared the life of an alien prince, and the consequences of that act would ripple far beyond the blood-stained fields of Cryon. Weeks later, the war officially ended. The Treaty of Cryon was signed, bringing an uneasy peace between humanity and the Zorith Alliance. The galaxy exhaled in relief, though the wounds of war would take far longer to heal. Daniel, still recovering from his injuries, returned to Earth a hero. Yet the weight of what he had done on Cryon never fully left him. One evening, as Daniel was preparing to leave his military post for a quiet retirement, an unexpected message arrived. The Zorith had requested his presence on their homeworld to honor the man who had spared their prince. The invitation came from Prince Valek himself. Curiosity outweighed Daniel's hesitation, and within days, he found himself aboard a transport ship heading to Zadra, the Zorith homeworld. The journey felt surreal, taking him to an alien world of towering spires, glowing forests, and bioluminescent cities, all bathed in the eerie light of a distant star. Zadra was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Upon his arrival, Daniel was escorted to the Grand Palace, where Prince Valek awaited him. The palace halls were lined with Zorith soldiers, their dark armor reflecting the dim light, their expressions unreadable. But Daniel felt no hostility, only respect. In the center of the throne room stood Valek, fully healed from his wounds, yet still bearing the scars of battle. The prince's regal presence filled the space, but when he saw Daniel, there was warmth in his eyes. "Lieutenant Daniel Reeves," Valek said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You spared my life when you had no reason to. You could have ended the war, but instead, you chose mercy. For that, my people and I are in your debt." Feeling out of place in the grandeur of the palace, Daniel shrugged. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Valek smiled faintly. "And that is why I wish to honor you." Before Daniel could respond, Valek gestured to his right. From behind a curtain stepped two figures, Zorith women, their regal features unmistakable. One stood tall and poised, her presence commanding, while the other, more delicate, moved with a quiet grace that filled the room. "These are my sisters," Valek continued, "Princess Celera and Princess Mila. As a gesture of peace, and in gratitude for your mercy, I offer them to you in marriage." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The shock was immediate, his mind racing to comprehend what he had just heard. Marriage to not one, but both Zorith princesses? It was an unprecedented offer, a union between two species that had been at war for years. The room fell silent, all eyes on Daniel, waiting for his response. He had expected gratitude, perhaps a medal or a title, but marriage? To alien royalty? It was unthinkable. And yet, as Daniel looked at the two women before him, each so different, both bound by the same sense of duty, he realized this was about more than him. It was a chance to forge peace between their worlds. "The galaxy will be shocked by this union," Valek said, breaking the silence. "But I believe it is the best way forward, a symbol of our commitment to peace." Daniel's heart raced as he weighed the gravity of the decision. He had made life-or-death choices in war, but this was different. It wasn't just his future on the line. It was the future of two civilizations. "I don't know if I'm worthy of this," Daniel finally admitted, his voice hoarse. Celera, the taller of the two sisters, stepped forward. "You are more worthy than you realize, human. Sparing our brother's life speaks to a strength far greater than any victory on the battlefield." Mila, the quieter sister, spoke next, her voice soft yet steady. "This may not be what you expected, but if you accept, we will walk this path together. For peace." With a deep breath, Daniel looked at Valek, then at Celera and Mila. The weight of the galaxy's future pressed on him. And yet, maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of shock that could change everything. "I accept." The journey to Zadra was one thing, but now Daniel stood at the precipice of a future he hadn't imagined, one that felt as foreign as the alien world beneath his feet. The acceptance of Valek's offer had been the easy part. Words spoken in a grand chamber, surrounded by beings who looked at him as if he were the savior of their race. Now, as the weight of those words settled in, he realized just how far he had plunged into the unknown. Celera and Mila, the two Zorith princesses who had been offered to him in marriage, were enigmatic. They stood at his side, regal and composed, as the formal procession began. Daniel had never felt so out of place. His military uniform, though neatly pressed, seemed plain compared. The streets of Alice, the capital city, were filled with alien onlookers, watching with cautious eyes as Daniel walked with Valek and the princesses toward the royal hall where the ceremony would be held. Every step brought a new wave of unease. How could he, a human soldier, marry two women he didn't know, from a species his people had fought against for years? The Zorith might have accepted him as a hero, but he was still an outsider, a reminder of the war that had ravaged their world. "Are you all right?" A voice came from his right. Daniel turned to see Mila, the quieter of the two sisters, watching him with concern. Her golden eyes, much like Valek's, held a gentleness that surprised him. Despite her delicate appearance, she had an inner strength that radiated from her. It was in the way she carried herself, in the calmness of her voice. "I'm adjusting," Daniel admitted. "This is all overwhelming." "I can imagine," Mila said softly. "Our customs must seem strange to you. But know this, Daniel. Though you walk a path unfamiliar, you do not walk it alone. We, too, are bound by duty." Her words echoed in his mind as they entered the grand hall. The vast space was illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent flora that seemed to grow out of the walls, casting the room in a surreal, almost dreamlike light. The Zorith nobility had gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on Daniel, Celera, and Mila. At the front of the hall stood Valek, flanked by the Zorith council, their expressions grave and serious. This was no mere wedding ceremony. It was a political event that would ripple across the galaxy. A human joining the Zorith royal family, was unprecedented. The union was more than just symbolic. It was a binding contract between their worlds, a promise of peace and cooperation that many hoped would last. The ceremony began with a speech from Valek, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "Today marks a new chapter for our people," he declared. "The war is behind us, but the future lies ahead, uncertain and fragile. In this moment, we seal our commitment to peace through the union of our royal bloodline with Lieutenant Daniel Reeves, a man who, in the face of violence, chose mercy." As Valek spoke, Daniel's gaze shifted to Celera. Unlike her sister, she had been silent since the offer was made, her emotions carefully concealed behind a mask of authority. Yet, standing next to her, Daniel could feel the tension beneath the surface. She was proud, commanding, and clearly unaccustomed to being in a position of vulnerability. This marriage was as much a duty to her as it was to him. When Valek finished speaking, an elder of the Zorith Council stepped forward, holding a silver chalice that shimmered with a pale, ethereal light. The elder spoke in the Zorith tongue, his words ancient and formal. Daniel didn't understand much of the language, but he knew enough to grasp the significance. The binding of their lives together was not just a personal vow, but a vow to their people, to peace. The chalice was offered first to Celera, who drank deeply, her expression unreadable. Then it was passed to Mila, whose calm demeanor never wavered as she sipped. Finally, it was Daniel's turn. He hesitated, the weight of what this represented heavy in his hands. The liquid inside the chalice glowed faintly, as if alive, and when he brought it to his lips, it tasted of something both sweet and bitter, like hope mingled with loss. As he drank, a strange warmth spread through his body, and for a brief moment, he felt a connection, a bond with these two women, with the Zorith people, with the future they were about to forge together. It was fleeting but powerful, a reminder that he was no longer just a soldier. He was something more now. The elder spoke once more, declaring the union complete, and the hall erupted in a low, resonant hum, a sound that Daniel recognized as the Zorith people's version of applause. It was strange, eerie, but also beautiful in its way. As the ceremony concluded, Daniel felt the eyes of the galaxy upon him. He was no longer just Daniel Reeves, the lieutenant who had survived countless battles. He was now a symbol, a bridge between two species that had once been enemies. His life, and the lives of Celera and Mila, were now intertwined in a way that transcended personal choice. After the formalities, Valek approached, his golden eyes gleaming with approval. "You've done well, Daniel," he said. "The galaxy may not understand this union at first, but they will in time." Daniel wasn't so sure. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on him. "What if I fail?" he asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at him since the moment he accepted the proposal. Valek placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm. "You won't. My sisters are strong. They will help guide you, as you will guide them. This is not a path you walk alone." As Valek left them, Daniel turned to Celera and Mila. For the first time since this strange journey had begun, he saw something in Celera's eyes, a glimmer of vulnerability, quickly masked by her usual composure. "Shall we begin?" Celera asked, her voice steady but distant. Mila smiled softly. "Yes," she said, glancing at Daniel. "Let's take this one step at a time." And with that, Daniel realized that despite the vastness of the galaxy and the magnitude of what lay ahead, there was a chance, however small, that this could work. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worth fighting for ever was. Together, they stepped out of the grand hall, leaving behind the echoes of the ceremony and into the uncertain future that awaited them. The towering spires of Alice faded into the background as Daniel, Celera, and Mila entered a private transport bound for the royal residence, a secluded estate deep within the glowing forests of Zadra. The silence inside the sleek, silver craft was thick, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Daniel stared out of the window, watching as the bioluminescent trees of the Zorith landscape zipped past in an otherworldly blur of blues and purples. He felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The ceremony, the union, the responsibility to uphold this fragile peace. The idea of marriage, especially to two alien women he barely knew, still seemed unreal. The enormity of it all settled deeper in his chest with every passing second. "You're quiet." Mila's voice broke through his thoughts. She sat across from him, her gaze soft but curious. He glanced at her, then at Celera, who sat beside him, her posture as stiff and poised as ever. Daniel wasn't sure how to respond. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. Celera, who had remained silent for most of the day, shifted slightly but said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if she were somewhere far away. "I understand," Mila said gently. "This is not what either of us expected." Daniel met her eyes, grateful for the understanding in them. Of the two sisters, Mila seemed more open, more willing to bridge the gap between their vastly different worlds. Celera, on the other hand, was harder to read, distant, guarded. He wasn't sure whether it was because of the situation or simply her nature. The transport hummed softly as it glided over a vast crystalline lake, the surface shimmering beneath the pale glow of Zadra's distant star. In the distance, Daniel could make out the sprawling estate that would soon be his new home, a palace-like structure woven seamlessly into the landscape, its walls glowing faintly as though it were a living thing. As they approached, Mila spoke again, her voice soft but resolute. "I think we should set some expectations for this arrangement." Daniel turned his attention to her, appreciating her directness. "That sounds like a good idea." Celera finally spoke, her tone sharp but not unkind. "This marriage is as much about duty as it is about peace. We are bound together by the will of our people and by the choices that have been made. But that does not mean we must pretend to be something we are not." Her words hung in the air, and Daniel could feel the tension behind them. She wasn't wrong. They were three strangers thrust into a situation none of them had chosen. Marriage in this context wasn't about love. It was about politics, peace, and the weight of two civilizations resting on their shoulders. "I don't expect this to be easy," Daniel replied, trying to find the right balance between honesty and diplomacy. "We're all in this because of our duties. But if we're going to make this work, we'll need to find common ground." Mila nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. "I agree, and I hope, in time, we can find a way to build trust, perhaps even friendship." Celera's gaze shifted to Daniel, her golden eyes unreadable. "Trust must be earned, Lieutenant Reeves. Our worlds have been at war for too long to simply forget everything that has happened." Daniel met her gaze, unflinching. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I do hope we can work towards something better than just fulfilling a political contract." For a moment, there was silence, the air thick with the unspoken complexities of their situation. Then Celera gave the slightest nod, a concession, perhaps, or maybe just acknowledgement that he wasn't completely naive. The transport slowed as they neared the estate. The glowing forest gave way to vast gardens filled with alien flora that pulsed softly with light, casting long shadows over the smooth stone pathways. As the craft landed gently at the entrance, Daniel couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness. This estate, though stunning, was not a home he had chosen, and the two women beside him were not the kind of companions he had ever imagined. The doors slid open, and the three of them stepped out into the warm, soft light of the courtyard. Waiting at the entrance was a small group of Zorth attendants, all bowing slightly as they approached. The head of the household staff, a tall Zorth man with pale blue skin and sharp features, stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to the Celestia estate," he said in the Zorth tongue, his voice smooth and formal. "Prince Valek has ensured that every detail has been prepared for your comfort." Celera gave a curt nod, her expression cool and authoritative. Mila offered a more polite smile. Daniel, still getting used to the nuances of Zorth custom, simply nodded, unsure how to respond. The estate was just as surreal up close as it had been from the air. The walls seemed to breathe with a faint glow, and the gardens radiated with life. Inside, the chambers were vast and elegantly adorned, filled with intricate carvings and flowing, organic designs that felt both alien and beautiful. It was a far cry from the utilitarian military bases and war-torn planets Daniel was used to. As they were shown to their living quarters, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life. How had he, a soldier from Earth, ended up here, in this opulent palace, bound by marriage to two alien princesses? That night, after they had been left to settle into their quarters, Daniel stood on the balcony of his room, overlooking the glowing forest. The air was warm, and a soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of flowers. In the distance, he could see the faint lights of Alice, the capital city, flickering like stars. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Milo approaching, her face soft in the dim light. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, coming to stand beside him at the balcony's edge. Daniel shook his head, staring out into the distance. "It still doesn't feel real." "It will in time," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's a lot to take in, I know, but I believe this could be something more than just a political arrangement." Daniel glanced at her, curious. "You do?" Mila nodded, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "I've seen enough of war to know that peace, no matter how fragile, is worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, we can build something out of this. Something real." Her words gave him a sense of hope, a glimmer of possibility amidst the overwhelming uncertainty. They stood in silence for a moment, side by side, gazing out into the night. Before long, the future would demand more of them, more decisions, more challenges. But for now, Daniel let himself be still, if only for a moment, in the quiet night of a world that was no longer quite as alien as it had seemed. And in that stillness, a fragile sense of hope began to take root. Days passed on Zadra, and with each new dawn, Daniel found himself slowly settling into this strange, new life. The palace estate, once foreign and overwhelming, became more familiar, its glowing walls and bioluminescent gardens shifting from alien to beautiful. He spent his days navigating diplomatic duties and his evenings reflecting on the monumental responsibility thrust upon him. He couldn't deny that things were shifting. Mila, with her warm demeanor, had become an ally, someone he could talk to openly. She guided him through the intricacies of Zorth customs and expectations, always with a gentle smile and quiet wisdom. Celera remained distant, a towering figure of discipline and duty, but even she began to thaw, albeit slowly. One evening, they gathered in the estate's grand hall for a formal dinner with Zorth dignitaries. Daniel sat between the two sisters, feeling the weight of the many eyes on them. The eyes of those who still couldn't believe a human now stood alongside their royal family. The conversations around them were polite but tense, as if the union between their species still teetered on the edge of fragile acceptance. But the real test was looming. The Concordia ceremony, an ancient Zorth ritual that symbolized the merging of two families and, by extension, two nations. It was more than just a symbolic union. It was a public declaration of peace between two once warring peoples. The ceremony would take place the following day, and its success, or failure, would ripple across the galaxy. The day of the ceremony. The great hall of the Celestia estate was transformed for the occasion. The towering windows allowed shafts of pale blue light to filter into the room, casting an ethereal glow over the assembled guests. Zorth nobles and high-ranking officials filled the space, their dark, elegant garments contrasting with the bioluminescent flora that lined the walls. Daniel stood near the center of the hall, feeling out of place in the ceremonial attire they had provided him. The fabric shimmered with a strange, iridescent hue, and it felt foreign against his skin. He glanced at Mila and Celera, who stood on either side of him, their expressions serene. Both sisters wore ornate gowns woven with delicate threads that glowed faintly, matching the soft illumination of the room. As the ceremonial leader, a venerable Zorth elder with skin the color of twilight, stepped forward to begin the ritual, the atmosphere in the room became tense. Everyone knew the stakes. The peace treaty between their peoples hinged on this symbolic union, and though many Zorth supported the idea, there were still factions on both sides who resented the thought of peace, let alone a marriage between a human and two Zorith princesses. The elder began to speak in the ancient Zorith tongue, her voice echoing through the hall with a musical cadence. Daniel didn't understand most of the words, but he knew what they symbolized. The binding of his fate to Zorith's future, the merging of Earth and Zadra through the union of three individuals. When the time came for Daniel to speak, he hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. He glanced at Celera, her golden eyes watching him with an intensity that pierced through the ceremonial calm. Mila's gaze was softer, but no less significant. "I stand here today," Daniel began, his voice steady, not just as a soldier from Earth or as a man who fought in a war. "I stand here as someone who believes in a future where our people, human and Zorith, can build something greater than the destruction we've known." His words were met with a murmur from the crowd, but Daniel pressed on. "I didn't choose this path, but I accept it. I accept it because peace is worth fighting for, and because I believe that together Celera, Mila, and we can bridge the gap between our worlds." He turned to face both women, feeling the weight of the moment. Celera's face remained impassive, but her eyes softened ever so slightly. Mila gave a small, encouraging nod. "And I vow," Daniel continued, "to uphold this peace, not just for the sake of our people, but for the sake of the future we can build together." With that, the elder completed the ritual, presenting a symbolic, glowing artifact that represented the binding of their union. Daniel took a deep breath as the crowd erupted into applause, though the sound was laced with an undercurrent of tension. The aftermath. Later that night, after the ceremony had concluded and the guests had left, Daniel stood alone in the gardens, staring up at the night sky. The stars here were unfamiliar, distant and strange, much like the life he now lived. He still couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's destiny. He heard footsteps behind him, soft and measured. "Celera, you did well today," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Daniel turned to face her, surprised by the compliment. "I'm not sure I believe that," he admitted. "It feels surreal." Celera stepped closer, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "This is our reality now. We did not choose this, but it is what we must make of it that will define us." Her words carried a weight of truth. Celera, as guarded and stoic as she was, understood the gravity of their situation better than anyone. She had fought for her people, just as he had for his. And now, they stood together, not as enemies, but as something else, something uncharted. Mila appeared a moment later, her presence as calming as always. She smiled softly at Daniel, her golden eyes warm. "We may have started as strangers, but I think we could become more than that if we let ourselves." Daniel nodded. "I'd like that." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, looking out over the glowing landscape of Zadra. The war, the pain, the loss, it all felt distant now, like a fading memory. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since arriving on this alien world, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. 1 year later, the union between Earth and Zadra, once a fragile hope, had blossomed into something more. The treaty had held, and with it came new alliances, new opportunities for both humans and Zorith to work together. Trade between the two worlds flourished, and cultural exchanges bridged the gap between their once divided peoples. Daniel had grown into his role as both a diplomat and a member of the royal family, though it still felt surreal at times. Mila had become a trusted partner, someone he could rely on for wisdom and guidance. And even Celera, though still reserved, had softened in her own way, sharing moments of quiet understanding with him. Together, the three of them had forged a bond, perhaps not the romantic ideal that others might have expected, but a partnership built on respect, duty, and a shared vision of peace. As Daniel stood once more on the balcony of the Celestia estate, watching the twin moons of Zadra rise into the night sky, he realized something. This strange, unexpected life, this union of two worlds, had become something more than just a political arrangement. It had become home, and in that home, Daniel, Mila, and Celera had not just survived, they had thrived, proving that even in the aftermath of war, peace was possible. It wasn't always easy, But it was worth it. For the first time in years, Daniel felt hope for the future, not just for himself, but for the galaxy they were building together.